Welcome back. It's time to talk about Multiverses, something that started out back in the day in Flash, the Flash of Two Worlds. Gardner Fox, one of the best issues of Flash in the history of the world, introducing the multiverse concept. And at this point, it has been beaten to death. And it is not only ruining comic books, it's ruining movies. And here talking about that is my good friend, Doc. How you doing, buddy?
I'm definitely better than the concept of multiverses because I have not been beaten completely into fucking paste yet. Like that horse, that thing is glue.
There's a recent article on Giant Freaking Robot, which I thought was pretty good. It's kind of an opinion page. And I wanted to use that to springboard off and talk about some of our issues with multiverses. It starts out stating, what was once a sci-fi trope only found in the pages of Marvel and DC Comics has spread like a weed into every fandom. Like all weeds, the multiverse trope is choking the life out of the sci-fi fantasy genre and preventing it from growing. The concept of infinite versions of each fandom with infinite variants of every character cheapens stories and erases any dramatic stakes.
It's become their catch-all. It's become their immediate get out of jail free. It's a literary crutch at this point. It is not a new creative avenue to explore. That's where the problem lies. Yeah, look, we all like the idea of the what if. I mean, there's a reason why Marvel did their what if stories for 50 years. They did, DC did their Elseworld stuff for a long time. They were little glimpses into the multiverse of shit that was just not quite the same as it is here. Sometimes big level, sometimes small level, and sometimes what are the consequences of one minor change in history? And that was interesting to a degree, but living in there, making that part of your everyday operating, where you're able to get back to these alternate worlds on a regular basis, it becomes a crutch, and a lot of untalented people are using that crutch very often.
I think that's the big problem, because back in the day, if you were going to do an Elseworld story at DC Comics, you were going to be one of the 5 or 10 best writers they had in their entire troupe of comic book writers to tell a story focusing on a character that was no longer constrained by the confines of in-continuity storytelling. So you can have a little bit of creative freedom to talk about the character, explore the character in ways that you wouldn't be able to do it, obviously within continuity. Some of it would be like a what if story, like Red Sun from Mark Miller, where what if Superman, landed in Russia instead of landing in Kansas? That completely changes the aspect of the character, which way he goes. And that's interesting storytelling. Or if you get like The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, what if Batman was just a little bit darker? What if things just went a little bit further than we're allowed to do in the pages of regular DC Comics? And it was really like a windfall. This is great creative stuff. And it made sense being in an Elseworlds type universe. But now they want to incorporate all that stuff in the mainline continuity because some of it is, quite frankly, more interesting. And it's really bogged down. And now everybody gets to work with multiverses.
It became a creative boon to a lot of really good creators, but it just became an easy trap for everybody that was less than talented. And that's what we have right now. We have a lot of people in comics that are very less than talented. Whenever they run out of creative ideas in the main continuity, or when they realize that they thing that they did 4 issues ago that everybody said, hey, this is going to backfire on you immensely, backfires on them immensely, they just reach into the multiverse because it's their get out of jail free card to fix their fuck up.
So in this article, they do have several examples. Let's talk about some of these. Take the MCU, for instance. Loki's death at the beginning of Avengers Infinity War had an emotional heft to it despite their differences. Thor truly loves his misfit brother, and seeing the god of mischief murdered right in front of him tortures his very soul. But surprise, thanks to the multiverse sci-fi trope, there are billions upon billions of Lokis. So many that some of them have silly little outfits, and one is even an alligator. No longer do fans have to deal with the very real feelings of grief that come when a popular character that they've come to love kicks the bucket. Like I said, taking a lot of shortcuts. And along with that, when I watched the Loki series, when the dude that works for the agency pulls open a drawer and he's got a bunch of Infinity Stones, and Loki's like, well, those are important. He's like, no, those are paperweights. Because now that we've got multiverses, Infinity Stones don't even mean anything. They're not important. They're not powerful anymore. And you're like, you just cut the balls off the entire premise of the MCU all the way through Endgame, which is one of the great, movie franchises of all time.
While the multiverse is their universal get out of jail free card, it also completely undermines any sort of stakes and any sort of emotional connection that you might have had to a thing that occurred, the thing you just finished watching. Whenever they start treating Infinity Stones, oh, well, these are just paperweights here, because we operate on such a much higher level. So all that shit that we just spent, 20 movies convincing you is super duper important, that was nothing. Here comes the thing that's really important. And we go, oh, you know what? Fuck you. Because that's the appropriate response whenever the emotional and connective stakes that you have to that thing get completely undermined by the creatives.
But there have been times, I have to admit, maybe I'm part of the problem, Doc. There have been times when I've enjoyed the multiversal aspect, when you do get those nostalgia moments, you get those member berries, like the 3 Spider-Men finally showing up in No Way Home. I thought that was a great moment. Of course, we have also got the Miles Morales Spider-Man movies, which are all about the multiverse, and they kind of talk about that here. Not only did Across the Spider-Verse have Oscar Isaac's Spider-Man 2099 hint at the events of No Way Home, but it also featured a live-action scene set in the convenience store from Venom. That now means that the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man films, the MCU, Sony's animated Spider-Verse, and Sony's live-action Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse, as well as every animated incarnation of Spider-Man ever created, all exist in the same multiverse. It should go without saying, but not everything has to connect, nor should it. And I can't agree with that any harder than that. I do think Across the Spider-Verse is a good movie, but we don't have to go so far. Not everything in the history of Spider-Man needs to be connected. There doesn't need to be a multiverse that contains the animated universe, the movie universe, that other movie universe, the third movie universe, comic books, ultimate comic books, and they don't all have to share like some type of, connective tissue about it. We can just say, that's Spider-Man in this medium, that's Spider-Man in this medium. And I kind of like having differentiators when it comes to the movies. Was it great to see, all 3 Spider-Man in the same live action movie at the same time? Yeah, somebody that's seen all the movies, it was a cool moment. But I think they need to stop there. You don't need to go further with that concept. Like, that was the moment.
I agree in principle here. Now, I think we have to look at what is the nature of a multiverse. A multiverse is the overall connection between all possible realities, which includes the animated universes, live action, parody, everything like that. We all can accept by multiverses existing and just acknowledging that they exist. Guess what? We already know from that everything is connected. What is the actual problem with that? By its nature, nothing. The difference is we don't need to show that they're able to interact together. And that's the problem TV and film and animation and everything else are falling into right now. Comic books do it all the fucking time.
Yeah, it just gets so convoluted, and there's no better example of this, and they do talk about it. We're not going to go into it too deep, but that Terminator franchise, like, you get Terminator, which is one of the great sci-fi, horror movies of all time. You get T2, which is one of the great sci-fi horror action blockbusters of all time, and it's absolutely amazing. And you realize at the end of that movie, they have adjusted the timeline. They pushed it out in the future because they destroy the very beginning of Skynet. Then when you start getting into Terminator 3, you start getting to the TV show. Next thing you know, you're getting into whatever it was, the one with the guy from
you had Genesis, you had Salvation.
Salvation. Yeah. Then we get into Genesis, and then we get into this last one, and all of a sudden the movies are interacting with each other, and they're going off and killing key characters in the movie timelines to reset everything to go back to 1980 because they realize they can't go forward with it. And it's like, once you've reached that point, your franchise might be over. You might need to reboot it or move on to something else. The timeline itself, because of the multiversal aspects that they've implemented into it, and the way that they've interacted with each other, and characters from the future are killing off characters from the past from stories you like, make it absolutely ambiguous at every turn of what is actually fucking going on. Not only the fact that they actually went back and ruined stuff that was great to begin with. They've never made a better Terminator movie than Terminator 2. They certainly only made one better Terminator movie than the first one, yet they're actually going back and retroactively changing those. That's just stupid.
And I can liken it a little bit to what Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, New Avengers, Fantastic Four, was building towards leading up to the 2015 Secret Wars. I feel like there's a weird meta commentary on how interacting too much between multiverses breaks the fucking multiverse and everything ends up collapsing. I'm not talking about like the structure of the multiverse. That doesn't collapse. What collapses is any sort of meaning behind your fiction. Your franchise collapses. You essentially keep hollowing it out at the foundation to the point where it's nothing but a bunch of twigs that are barely holding together, and the first strong breeze that comes through blows your entire franchise down, and it's fucking dead after that.
And it absolutely kills fan discourse. You can't even have good arguments anymore. And this is the way that they finished the article. For all the best sci-fi fantasy franchises to move forward, they're going to have to abandon the multiverse sci-fi trope, or at least tone it down. Sure, fans want cheap nostalgia and fan service, but what they want even more is for characters' death and sacrifices to mean something. They want situations that can't be undone by popping into a parallel timeline and snagging a different variant of a fallen comrade. Most importantly, geeks want to argue over which versions of something is better. How are we supposed to argue over which Batman movies are better, the Michael Keaton ones or the Ben Affleck ones, when now, thanks to the multiverse, they're technically part of the same series? Absolutely. Everybody should have their favorite Spider-Man. They should have their favorite Batman, and there should be reasons why that version of the character in that universe is awesome. Connecting it all together and having them interact with each other kind of ruins the discourse. Like, I want to argue with you, Doc. I don't want to have to sit there and try and figure out how it happened.
Yeah. I mean, like, again, I agree in principle. Now, first of all, they were always connected. But they couldn't interact before. That's the problem. So we got to have these cool fucking arguments. We got to have the comic shop Discord and the, bitching at each other and fighting on the internet, discussions during live streams. We got to do all that stuff because they didn't try to show us.
Well, and then you also had all the theories. Like, we'd have these like super big brain nerds go out there and like, listen, because this happened in this movie and this happened in this movie, and in a third completely separate movie that never even touched either one of them, this also happened in the background. All three of them are connected. And that was way more interesting than actually showing it on the big screen.
It really was, because see, once you start showing it, all of those big like logical flaws become more and more and more obvious. We can just kind of hand wave some of that shit away. The minute you start trying to put it on the screen and make it make sense, all those big glaring problems and giant fucking plot holes get amplified. They get magnified. And then we just go, oh, so it was written by a fucking idiot.
I like the multiverses. I liked it when the way that they were used. Back in the day, when you bring out the trope, they would interact very rarely. If it was a crossover story, and then they would kind of move on. You had your Elseworlds happening in Elseworlds. You had your What If happening in What If. But now everything has to be so connected, because of the shared movie universe. They think everything has to touch each other and acknowledge each other. And I think it's not only taken some of the fun out of it, but it's also given so many of these bad writers real shortcuts to make decisions regarding the fates of characters when they know it doesn't really mean anything. And I think it's just cheapened everything, and it's made, comics and movies just a less fun thing to explore and consume these days.
Without a doubt, it's for the lazy and incompetent. It was a treat at the, a little bit of a dessert after a long bout of really good continuity and story building, and then you give us this tiny little Easter egg or the little chocolate on your pillow in a hotel. At the end of the day, made your night finish off great. That's what it was. Now it's a bunch of fat kids gorging themselves on pie all the time. And they're wondering why, hey, this is not healthy anymore. No shit, it was never healthy.
Despite the discussion I just had with Doc and not really loving multiverse in the way that they're being used in comic books or movies right now, we're going to be getting a lot more multiverses because we know the MCU informs Marvel Comics now, and phase 5 and 6 of the MCU are known as the Multiverse Saga. We haven't even really started touching just how badly they're going to overplay and overuse the multiverse trope over the next 5 or 6 years. I've kind of broken it all down right here. There's a little cynicism in this video, as you might imagine. Definitely check it out right here. There's also a link in the video description.